You are listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. Coming to you virtually live from high atop the historic Raleigh building in beautiful downtown Raleigh. The NCF&B takes the listener behind the scenes to tell the stories of the people that contribute to the creation of the food and beverage community of North Carolina. And now, the misfits in the dish pit, the faces of the front. They are Max Trujillo and Matthew Weiss.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And folks, we're talking whiskey today. We know you love our whiskey shows.
Hell yeah.
And today we're not just talking about whiskey, but we're talking about courage and conviction and what that means to whiskey. And to walk us through those sentiments, we have the CEO of the Virginia Distilling Company, Mr. Gareth Moore.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a hell of an introduction there, so appreciate that.
Well, it's well-deserved.
Yeah, I mean, I said recently on a podcast that didn't we give claim to South Carolina was our second favorite state in the union as like as a joke, and then I said,
as a joke.
Virginia's cool, and like Tennessee, we like you guys too. That's all right. So this is me just backpedaling, and then let's get somebody from Virginia real fast on here so that people don't get mad at us.
Better cover our bases around the Southeast.
There we go.
I was only pandering because Proof Alcohol Ice Cream is one of our sponsors, and they were created in Greenville, South Carolina, or Columbia, South Carolina. So I just had to, pander. You got to go where the money's at,
Absolutely.
But where the whiskey's at is apparently up in those Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. So let's get into that. Maybe start us off with just letting us know when your distillery was created.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we go back to 2011, which in terms of single malt brands isn't exactly an ancient company, but in terms of American single malt, does go back a reasonable amount of time. The company was founded by my late father, George Moore. He was a Irish immigrant and came to this country in 1972. He made it big, made the American dream in technology. And when he retired and sold his big tech company, he decided he wanted to start the next great American whiskey company. He had a lifelong passion for single malts. A bit strange that he was from Ireland and like Scottish products, but you guys are from North Carolina and you like things from South Carolina, you like things from Tennessee and now Virginia, right? So you got to like what you like. And so he wanted to found an American single malt. And he got the distillery off to the races about 18 months in 2013, took a heart attack and passed and fell into my lap. My father and I had worked together on several things, mainly technology companies and investments, but never on the distillery. It was kind of a dream that I heard a lot about. And in fact, I was never even there on site with my father. But a month or two after he passed, my mom said, go down to Nelson County, Virginia, and go see what your father was up to. And I was very naive at the time and said, yeah, whiskey, easy, let's go do it. So I went down there, and the facility was partway under construction. We had some of the equipment. We had a shell of a building. We didn't have windows or doors. And again, being very naive, I was looking around thinking, all right, where's the on button, right? Let's start making whiskey.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself is kind of interesting. That so your father this was his dream. I mean, you said he was successful. And I hate to talk about money to be whatever, but your pops sold his company for $650 million in 2011.
I haven't Googled that, but yeah, that sounds.
Yeah,
there might be Google articles about that.
There have been a few articles about it. It was a fairly.
Yeah. He came here on a scholarship to George Washington University. Had $200 in his pocket, and that really is the American dream.
It really is.
He lived it.
So, but in talking of that dream, it seems like in his golden years, if you will, like after he did all he did in his business, this was his new dream. It's a little whimsical or a little sad to melancholy to say that he didn't get to see the fruit of it continue on, but he has lineage, and this wasn't necessarily, I'm just guessing, that this wasn't like your dream, perhaps?
No.
But it was put right in front of you.
As I said, I was naive, and it seemed like it was easy. And in terms of whiskey, I was up to the drinking portion of the competition.
Sure.
And it had been raised by him, and then seeing visits to Scotland and all these different distilleries. Certainly, anytime we went back to Ireland, we would go to Bushmills or Jameson's, and that was really the all that I knew about it. And so, it wasn't really my passion at that time, but I picked it up and ran with it. It became my passion. Part of that is just the longevity of whiskey, right? If you're doing it, it's not something you're going to do in a year or 2 years or 5 years. It takes a long time to build. It takes a long time to age, and in it to win it, and it became my passion.
But also, you were. Let's not say you're not a tremendous slouch yourself. I'm
an okay slouch.
You're a pretty good slouch, not a tremendous slouch.
Yeah.
Your father. I have an inkling that put an importance on education, as you are well educated, have an MBA from Georgetown. So going into this, it probably wasn't as overwhelming as it would have been for a lot of people with maybe no background in business, or maybe they're in a completely different field. Like, you knew how to set this business up for success, or carry on what the groundwork that your father had laid.
And that's definitely the initial approach that I took, and 100% is just the business focus, right?
Yeah.
How do we get it funded? How do we get it constructed? How do we build a team? How do we build a brand? How do we get it operational? And all those fun bits in between. But it was through doing that and looking at it purely through a business lens, right, and not necessarily the consumer lens, or having it as a romance project or a passion project just for myself. I think that kind of gave me some good perspective that now that it has really consumed a lot of my life, and I have become passionate about it. I'm glad that I had those initial years of really just looking at it purely as a business enterprise.
Right.
So it allows kind of that perspective of stepping back from, whiskey's awesome. Whiskey's really cool. There's a lot of other things that you can do that you don't bring up at cocktail parties. People don't ask you about, how was the lawyering today? How was the accounting today? And that sort of thing, versus hearing about whiskey. But yeah, I'm glad that I've been able to take that more detached perspective in the beginning, before it really did kind of get its hooks on my heart and soul.
And so, speaking of the hooks on your heart and soul, and the actual liquid itself, you guys are really digging your haunches in to the idea of a true American single malt whiskey. That's what this new Courage and Conviction is all about. And that has differed, or maybe that was always the plan, because there's the controversial, or I'll say controversial, about the blending of the Virginia Highland series or whiskeys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But was that always the plan then, to find a way to get to American single malt, or how did that evolve with the VHW series?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you build a distillery and you start distilling, you get this beautiful liquid out of the stills, and say, all right, let's sell it in 5 years.
Yeah.
So when we got started in 2015, we knew that it would be some time until we had something that was really, truly an American single malt. But that's always been the goal, is to be an American single malt. That was absolutely my father's vision. That's what our equipment is designed for. We'd have to have a pretty significant capital investment to change over to making bourbon or rye or anything else. And so VHW was really a way to, I'd say initially it was just looking at, all right, revenue and a brand, right? Let's get our feet wet. But that definitely was a good experience for revenue and for brand building. But I think the kind of unintended, happy side effect was that it built internally into our team a kind of capacity, a competency for blending. And, blending is something that before I was involved with the industry that I think, like many consumers, single malt good, blending bad, but learned that it's a lot more complicated than that. We are doing 100% malt using some of our own products, a smaller amount in the early years while it was very young. Now we're using about 50-50 of our own product, and then imported product from Scotland. And, it was really nice to have internally that kind of sensory analysis training for multiple folks across the team. It was really nice to make some mistakes, right? What happens if the whiskey turns a funny color? It tastes fine. It looks pink. What are we going to do? It was nice to have, the expertise from consultants and mentors to help us get through that, so that by the time that the distillate that we had been laying down since 2015 was ready for market, that, we hit the ground running in understanding, selecting different casks, putting them together, slow reductions, tabletop prototypes of different batches, not taking 5 years to get there, but kind of leveraging the last 5 years in the experience of VHW Now, of course, we call it VHW, and I don't remember what it used to be called due to legal obligations with the Scotch Whisky Association. But I'm sure if you Google it, it's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
So real quick, real quick in that, just looking at it, just to clarify for a couple people, then you don't need to speak to this if you don't want to, but there was some claims just like the certain words are protected in certain liquors. Tequila has to come from tequila. It has to come from Mexico. It has to be like in the region of tequila, or champagne has to be from Champagne. Scotch, of course, is Scottish whiskey, but there are other terms on top of that are also protected, like the word Highlands. Am I correct in saying that? And so
I believe you are, yes.
So
or you probably are. I'm contractually obligated to say you probably are right about that, the H word.
Okay, and so it's
a regional distinction,
right? And like the word Highlands kind of just has a connotation with Scotch and Scottish whiskey, and so whether you're in Highlands, actual Highlands, like elevated land in another land or whatever, and you're just saying this is what it is because you are in Virginia, in an elevated area. So one could say you're in the Highlands of Virginia, but there are certain particulars. And I guess in the end, yay for lawyers for keeping it clean and mucking it up and whatever you want to say. But there is some beauty in protecting what is, noble and has been going on for years. All that said, your drive for wanting a style of American whiskey has a beautiful style that is reminiscent to Scotch. That was the first thing that came out of my mouth out of my mouth as I tasted Courage and Conviction. I'm like, oh, this is like Scotch. I said that to my neighbor, who's a big Scotch drinker. Actually, the voice that you heard in the beginning of the show that announces it, Brian. We both went, oh, yeah. Like, I've had whiskey all over the country, all the different states and various places. I've yet to have anything domestic that I could even venture to say tastes like something from those Highland areas north of England. But I thought, like, job well done. If that's what you're trying to do, job well done.
Yeah, well, no, and I appreciate that. And I think it comes down to our stills are from Scotland, right? It's the same equipment that you get over there. The engineering came from, in building the facility, came from Harry Coburn, industry legend, about 83 years young now. And then, in terms of the distillate and in fine tuning exactly what we were producing, it's the late, great Dr. Jim Swan of Scotland and worldwide fame for hot weather maturation. And so, between the ingredients, between the technique, between the equipment, we are really doing the same things that are done in Scotland. But I think the one thing that makes us very different is the maturation environment. And so, not to take too much time of how we kind of came to the point of figuring out the maturation environment, but when we were at the point of construction where it was time to build warehouses, we knew we were going to have barrels filled soon. There's a lot of wineries nearby where we are in Central Virginia, and so we visited a lot of neighbors, and we looked at how do we get a maturation environment in terms of the humidity, in terms of the temperature year round, the fluctuations that would be ideal for single malt. And of course you look at Scotland and you say, okay, well, we can't have it terribly hot and sweaty in the summer. And looking like days like today, like it probably is in Raleigh, where there's ice outside of the cask houses right now. And so as we were looking into that, and of course for large warehouses to have those climate controlled, it's expensive on the front end, in terms of the capex. It's also expensive in terms of just operating expenses. But it was when we found Dr. Swan, who was a consultant at the time for Cavalan out of Taiwan. He paid a few trips to Virginia in 2015-16. He made this very, very good point that not only would it be expensive to build those buildings, but we would really be robbing ourselves of the opportunity to give the whiskey a sense of place. When I was explaining that idea of climate control and how we would look at it, he was nearly offended. Driving from Dulles Airport down to the facility, and his thought was, if you're going to do that, well, why didn't you just build the thing in Scotland, right? it'd be easier. And by the way, there's plenty of distilleries over there. And so his point was that you don't change your maturation environment to match your distillate, but that you change your distillate to match your maturation environment. And so our warehouses are very simple. low insulation. We palletize. We let the heat and the humidity come in the summer. We let it get dry and cold in the winter, and really let the climate have at it. And it's not just between the seasons, but also intraday, that there are a lot more fluctuations that you would see in a more mild climate like Scotland or Ireland, or even certain regions of Japan where they age whiskeys. And so it's that extreme between the high humidity and the high heat, and the low humidity and the low heat, that really gives our whiskey a sense of place, and gives it maturation that happens on a timeline that's a little faster than those guys north of England. That's not a great economic proposition, because we evaporate a heck of a lot more in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So our cost becomes similar.
The angels are thirstier on this side of the Atlantic. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like to think of them as angels. It's kind of like a lost prophet type situation. Anytime we walk into the warehouse with like a new visitor, people love the smell. It's like, yeah, I know, like it's nice, but like what it represents is suboptimal.
Yeah, you as a business guy are saying that's just dollars evaporating.
Into your nose.
Yeah,
Stop
getting all those free smells.
Well, exactly. We haven't gotten away.
We're actually charging you per breath. So that'll be $15.
If we could figure that out, if we could patent that technology, I'm all in.
Yeah, you're like, hey, chubby guy in the corner, stop we heaving over here like some wheezing. Come on.
Yeah. Slow breaths, slow, deep breaths. Yeah, exactly. So, but that was really the strategy, was trying to get a sense of place. And I think, anything that somebody's going to say good about the whiskey beyond that, it's similar to what they're familiar with, a single malt Scotch, and it's malted barley, it's yeast, it's a single distillery, and it's 100% used oak. We're not doing any new oak as in the American tradition, but our differentiator from our friends on the other side of the pond is really that maturation environment.
Yeah, there's a lot to unravel there, and I want to start defining some of the terms and like distillate, blending, weather, and why that's important in whiskey. But you also mentioned Japan, and I would be remiss if I didn't take that opportunity to talk about something else that they make in Japan, which is a great sponsor of our show. And if you are here, or the next time you're in Raleigh, I'll hand you a cold flash brewed Boss coffee, which is made in Japan by this really cool process of where it's brewed cold or flash brewed cold
and chilled fast.
You get
that optimal flavor and texture. Yeah, it's cool. It's different than what most cold brew coffees, like the process of how it's made. But what defines them, and it's what defines them, makes them unique, sets them apart. They have 3 different flavors. They have black, vanilla, and cafe au lait. And you can find them on this little tiny website, Jeff Bezos's little marketplace. It's called Amazon.com. Everyone, put the .com at the end. It's not an edu. But you get to get 10% off on any Amazon purchase for Boss Coffee if you use the NCFB podcast promo code. So make sure you take advantage of that. There's no sugar. It's keto and gluten and dairy free. So it's fantastic. Check it out, Boss Coffee.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack some of those things. So just to talk about blending, I don't think the average consumer realizes how important blending is. But if you did listen to our Pappyland episode, or you listened to Nicole Austin's episode, blending's everything in whiskey. As a matter of fact, like the most sought after bourbon in the world, the Pappy Van Winkle brand, is in fact many different whiskeys. It's just from the mind of Julian Van Winkle, of how he assembled the blend to make it taste like something that he remembered that his father and his grandfather used to make. And so, within a warehouse, by the way, do you guys do rick houses? Are there barrels stacked on top of another, like a bourbon warehouse, or how does that work?
Our sherry butts are stacked,
okay,
like in Rick's kind of traditional dunnage style, where they're one on top of the other horizontally. But our other casks are all palletized, so on their heads.
Okay, so and just based on how high or low there are, being that heat rises, that changes the flavor profile of a whiskey, and it takes a master blender to figure out what works with what. It's like a great chef building with baking or cooking with spices. Pinch of salt, pinch of pepper.
Exactly. And so we with a more extreme climate than you would see in Scotland, we have more variation even within the cask houses, day to day and season by season. But we use different types of casks for the Courage and Conviction product. The secret recipe, and you have to promise you're not going to tell anybody this, is
Nobody's
50%.
listening, don't worry.
Yeah, it's 50% former bourbon casks. We get those exclusively from Brown-Forman. Then it's 25% sherry butts. We use Pedro Jimenez, Fino, and Oloroso primarily. And then it's 25% what we call a cuvee cask, which is a term of art for the technical term is STR, shave, toast, and rechar. What that is originally American oak that then held a premium European red wine. Once it's had its life with red wine, it then broken down, take off the hoops, get down to the staves, and then shave this really, really precise layer within each of the staves where you're trying to shave deep enough that you're getting untoasted wood, right? So something that hasn't already been toasted or charred, but you're not trying to go so deep that you're missing that wine-soaked layer, right? So you're kind of going right between where you get rid of the toast, but you don't get rid of that wine-soaked layer of wood. And then there's a toast that happens after that, and then a very light rechar. And what that does is, we're all familiar with the Maillard effect, or most of us are, that it creates this really beautiful caramelized kind of crust on the ends of the staves. You think about throwing a steak on the grill and you get some great sear marks, but if you take a marinated steak, particularly something with sugars, residual sugars like a wine, you get this really, really nice, very tasty kind of crust on the wood.
Yeah.
And it produces a beautiful whiskey. So that's the last 25%. And so
that's a lot of work to just get right back to a barrel. I'd be like, these are fine.
Let's just go with the used one.
Yeah. Well, wait if you taste them. Because it's a blend, right? And while we say 50, 25, 25, it's not written in stone. It's going to be exactly that amount. And
wait a second, Gareth. You just said wait till you taste them. Are you inviting Max and I to your next blending session? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
We'll
I will be offended if you're not there. So, yeah, it's right up to Route 29. Directionally from Raleigh, where you don't even have to use Waze.
Matt helped build this show just for a free lunch, and
that was the idea. How do we get free lunch and free whiskey tastings all the time? So yeah.
There you go. Well, you'll be successful.
Awesome.
But yeah, so in blending, it's not just the differentiation between casks of the same type, but it's the balance of the bourbon casks, which tend to be more neutral. It's really the backbone of the whiskey. The vanillins really come out and provide that base. And then our cuvee casks, sweeter, fruitier, add some really nice depth and a lot of color as well. And then lastly, our sherry butts. Those are also traditional in Scotland. People are familiar with it, but those three pieces go really nicely together. And within the sherries, I mentioned three different types of sherries, and so ensuring that you have the right balance of that Oloroso, kind of more on the nutty side, and Fino on the sweeter side, a little drier with the PX, and then taking those individual notes, if you will, and finding the right balance so that those notes, which are very nice on their own, and we're releasing expressions later this year of those individual cask types, putting them together in such a way that it kind of produces a chord, right? A pleasing kind of harmony of the different individual components. And as I was saying earlier, we were really happy accident of learning a lot of that capacity in blending through the experience with the VHW series.
So you have this recipe sort of down, but what if one year, I don't know, it's hotter than expected and the sherry casks, perform better, or the bourbon casks? Will you adjust then and say, no, this year it's going to be more of the bourbon cask and less of the sherry cask, or vice versa?
Exactly. So, we've done three batches, or batch 3 is being bottled right now, and batch 4 is being racked. So it's definitely not the exact same recipe for all three, because as you mentioned, there's different seasonality, right? Across 12 months, it matters when we put the casks up into the warehouse. Was it in winter? Was it in summer? Was it later in the year? They're going to differ. So it's not just that you look at the amount of months and say, okay, here is 48 months or 60 months, and exactly 50% and 25, but it's a team approach of putting together tabletop prototypes of those ratios. Actually taking a step back from there's actually selecting the various casks where we have a team that goes through and drills the casks, get these samples. We started by only ever tasting one cask out of a pallet. We could fit 4 casks onto a pallet, and thinking that would be representative of that slice of the warehouse, if you will. But it turns out that there can be differentiation on a pallet. And so we started tasting everything on the pallet. And you have to think about casks as not just a static object that's reacting to the spirit and to the environment, but wherever they were before. Were they high in the warehouse or low in the warehouse in their previous life? I mentioned Brown Forman as the ply that we use. And so it's different if it's a Woodford cask versus if it was a Old Forester or if it was early times, the age of each one of those ones. Our distillate, when we're distilling, is pretty homogeneous. It's a standard kind of quality that we're looking for. But then once it goes into the oak, between the organic nature of the oak and the volatile nature of the environment, the only way to really know what's going to happen and what's going to go on the other side is through sensory analysis.
Yeah. I just want to touch on that for a second, because some people might be listening and they're like, well, what are you talking about? It goes in oak and then it just sits in the oak. But what you're saying, and you talked about the seasons, and I'm so happy you did. And that is one of the things that makes Kentucky bourbon so different than others, is because of those harsh winters and warm summers. And when it's warm, just like anything, oak is a porous thing. It expands and allows other oxygen and other things to come in the barrel. But then when it gets cold again in the winter, the wood contracts, and then those flavors get concentrated again within the whiskey, that it gained over the hot weather. So it is a really important thing. And Max, I didn't even think about this, but like when you're running a distillery, you're constantly running the still if you're doing things efficiently, because you need to make product. But then, so it's like, how often, I guess, then do you blend? Do you have a blending session of when you're ready to bottle? Because not all of those casks are ready. So you have to have a certain amount of casks ready. And that's why I guess also other bourbons are getting into like seasonal releases, or if you're bottled in bond, I think you can only be from one season.
Yeah. Well, that ends up just coming down to, like, I imagine just comes down to square footage and the amount of barrels you have, and then how much revenue or how much you're actually moving too, right? Like if you aren't selling this stuff and it's sitting there, you're like, well,
I guess we're not running the still today because we got too much product that's sitting in the warehouse already. Yeah.
Yeah. But if it's a well-oiled machine,
my background is in finance and investing, and when I fell into this, it's a very, very unique model when you look at starting from scratch with a distillery, because if you think of a large established group over in Scotland or in Kentucky, they're replenishing the stocks that they had depleted that year. Or if they're thinking about growth, they're growing the stocks. But when you're starting with zero, you're running the stills, and your revenues are not coming from what you lay down, what you distill every day. I like to tell some finance guys that we have a huge working capital cycle, because the grain providers like to be paid when they drop off the grain, but our consumers don't pay us for 4, 5, 6 years. We have to be very patient and mindful of what we're laying down. And of course, given that, we were laying down a large amount of product so that we would be able to hit the market at speed, we had to have a lot of confidence of what we were laying down was going to be good one day. To really ensure that, we relied on a lot of outside experts, not just our local team, but I mentioned obviously Jim Swan, Harry Coburn, another person actually who our third batch is going to be named for, Nancy Fraley. She's known as the Nose, the great sensory analysis. I don't know if you're familiar with Nancy. She's fabulous, but so she really is huge behind the training of the team in terms of how to do that sensory analysis at various stages. And then many samples have gone through FedEx to her home to help with the tabletop and prototypes and working through, how do you start with these separate casks? How do you grade them? How do you say when they are ready? And then, how do you figure out those different combinations that's going to result in something that's very pleasing? And also importantly, and this might be getting too geeky, is when you blend, I think people might have the impression that you just take them, dump them in a cask, or dump them in the bottling tank, and then put them into a bottle. But you need to allow time for the various components to integrate and to marry. And not only do you need those various components to integrate, but when you're proofing, our casks are 62.5% ABV, but we bottle at 46%. And so, we're slowly reducing the amount of alcohol by introducing water has to be done, not just all at once. You don't do the math and dump a bunch of water in, but you slowly, add bit by bit more water so that you avoid saponification, which is a nice geeky whiskey term. But you're trying to avoid getting the oils to kind of fall out of the solution of the alcohol in a way that gets a little cloudy, doesn't get a nice mouthfeel. And by having a lot of time between when we originally rack the cask and when it's ready for the bottle, we're able to have a lot of time for marrying the different components, and also have plenty of time to do those slow reductions where we take about 16 weeks at a minimum to add water, so that we're doing no more than half a proof point a week in reductions.
I'd like to take it back a little bit, kind of thinking back to your father and even for yourself. Like when your father was building this distillery, and even prior to that, what was he drinking? What were you drinking? And what has been kind of like a muse, if you will, to guide you? Like what were some of the things? I see some bottles just over your head on the back shelf. I think I spy a Basil Hayden's back there. I don't know if my eyes are good enough to check that out, but it seems like
it's all my products. I think it's all Virginia Distillery products.
So you I keep the other. All right, I like that.
It's all underneath the desk is where I keep the other supplies. So I can't have people walking in and see competitors and so on. But I got some good stuff in here. Yeah, it's a good branding, man. I just put a marker on top. Yeah. So.
But what were you? What was kind of the source material to get to where you're at now? What were you inspired by?
If there was one to pick from, it would absolutely be Aberlour.
Nice.
The year I was born, my mother bought my father a hogshead, which is smaller than a butt, sherry for Aberlour. And there was a very clever branding person at the time that said, "All right, we're going to go ahead and sell a bunch of 18-year futures in casks because they're going to be ready to bottle in this magical future time called the millennium." So that was 1982. They were, selling 18 years. And so my father was already a fan of Aberlour, but, getting those samples every few years of seeing how it was coming along, behind his bar, having this frame of the cask number and the Millennium collection and things like that. And I think ultimately it yielded 360 bottles. Purely on a volume basis, we were drinking a lot of that, and I certainly still have plenty of that in my personal collection. But I think that style, something that's lighter. We're not looking at a lot of peat. We're not looking at something that's going to be super oily, and definitely the fruit that we see from sherry, but in our case even more so with those cuvee casks.
How do we get paid for 18 years in the future? Like, could we sell sponsorships for the next big, like we should offer Elon Musk sponsorships now for 18 years or something like that. I don't know.
That's true.
I mean, that is brilliant to get paid for 18 years in the future.
By the way, having to do with nothing other than the fact that you brought up Elon Musk, did you know? I mean, obviously everyone knows now he's the richest man in the world.
Yeah.
But did you know that his self-worth was $40 billion at the beginning of 2020, and now he's currently at $168 billion. I believe that's the number.
What a tough year for him.
Yeah,
I know.
2020 really
for all of us.
Yeah.
It hits us in different ways. I mean, I know he was looking for 200 billion, but he'll get there.
Poor guy.
He'll get there.
Poor guy.
He's a loser. Can't get there. How about? I do want to know, like in the sales side of things, it's something I'm really interested in. I was telling Matt this before we got on the mic. I'm very curious about non-Kentucky based whiskeys in America. I feel like that market is growing. I feel like it's not just growing, it's actually getting better, and that's why it's growing. I think like people like Balcones out in Texas is making a really great product. I think you look at the aforementioned Nicole Austin and George Dickel coming out of Tennessee. But how is it putting on your salesman cap right now? How is whiskey sales non-Kentucky doing at the moment?
So, my late father, you mentioned his technology business. He was data and analytics driven and big data. And so, I definitely use that in all aspects of the business and certainly in sales. And so, in the last year, just using a bunch of Nielsen data, we were able to find a pretty interesting trend. And, it's funny when you get a ton of data and you have to pay a bunch of money for it, and then you start slicing and dicing it, you want to make sure that you're not, having a confirmation bias of trying to look for the right answer, but, torturing the data until it confesses. And so I found this trend. If you think about, American whiskey 20 plus years ago, very, very, very much dominated entirely by bourbon. Shortly after that, you had rye kind of making a comeback and splitting off. And so, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you thought of, let's call it 2000, perhaps that was 95% bourbon, 5% other. And within that 5%, you just had rye break out and become its own category that, represent another 5% unto itself, taking some of the bourbon market share, but also, both categories growing rapidly. And so, taking that model and looking at the last 5 years, if you take three categories and say, all right, market share is comprised of traditional bourbon, rye, and then other American whiskey. Mm-hmm. Within that other American whiskey category, it's not growing rapidly compared to bourbon and rye. But within that category, we are starting to see some trends break away, like American single malt. You mentioned Balcones, and they're definitely one of the leaders in the States of making an American single malt. Jared Himstead is on the American Single Malt Commission with me. The guys at Westland out in Seattle. They're also leading the charge on American single malts. And in fact, there's at last count 172 different brands that are producing some sort of American single malt in their product line. And the consumers are liking it. There's a huge variety of styles. Not all of them are as traditional as ours are, with used wood and traditional techniques, pot stills, and so on. But there's great variety from East Coast to West Coast, different types of ingredients, different types of casks, different distilling techniques. So I definitely see American single malt following in the steps of rye, of being in kind of that other American whiskey category for now, but slowly starting to break away. If you broke away just that section, American single malt versus all other American whiskeys that aren't rye or bourbon, that other category is going down, but American single malt's going up. So I think we're in the right place.
In that place, you guys, I think, have kind of a more hard and fast line, or thinking of what is American single malt, and you want it to be based on the Scotland model, where it's 100% malted barley and it comes from one distillery, are the very basic tenets of single malt whiskey. And so, as it grows in a category, and going back to Max's question about sales, do you think that it needs to stay diverse, or should it define itself more narrowly?
Well, right now there isn't an actually defined category within TTB, right? So we're kind of just that other American whiskey. And when we say single malt on the label, that's according to TTB, that's a fanciful name versus an actual legitimate category. So we're working really diligently with these other brands as part of the American Single Malt Commission to get that definition.
So there's no definition at all? I thought there was something like 50. It had to be 51% barley at least, or something like that.
That's for American malted whiskey.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be malted barley. It could be malted rye. It could be malted wheat. It could be whatever. I think you can malt quinoa. You can't malt corn, but anything you can malt can fit into that malted whiskey category. And you're right; it only has to be 51%. And so, when we're trying to define the category, we're not trying to restrict what people can do in terms of innovation, because as I said earlier, there's great variety of styles across the U.S. But really, we're trying to take the definition that the Scots and even the Irish and Japanese have created in consumers' minds, right? That the single means one distillery, that the malted means malted barley, and that the region is important. If it's Scotch, it has to be in Scotland. If it's American, it has to be in the United States. And so we're trying to get TTB to formalize that definition. And in terms of still allowing innovation, we're trying to make sure that on the maximum proof that we're not restricting that any more than the standard whiskey definition does. But through the TTB, we're not restricting any sort of cask except what the TTB calls for the overarching whiskey category that does have to be oak. We're not putting a minimum age statement like the Scots do at 3 years and a day. So we're trying to, I guess, align with what consumers already have in their mind based on these other countries that really set the path. But at the same time, enabling a huge variety of styles and innovations, so that hopefully the United States at some point could have generations from now defined styles of single malt, just the same way that the Scotland does. Whether it's the Islay or Campbelltown or Highlands or Speyside, it would be great to have a Pacific Northwest style or a Texas style, or a Midwest style or a Virginia style.
It's funny.
So that's
we kind of touched upon that when we were talking with Nico von Cosmos over at Stardust Cellars out in Wilkes County. He's making some crazy wine. He's also making mead and beer, but he's doing a really edgy thing, and he's biodynamic, and he's got a sense of place where he's making his product. What I'm hopeful for, and this then transcends to your company as well, is that I'm looking forward to a time where we're breaking convention of just that only certain places are where you get great things. Like Burgundy. Traditionally, it's Chardonnay, it's Pinot Noir. You want some of the best Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in the world, you go to Burgundy. But that's also just part of a lineage and years of like the guys that make wine in Burgundy have their dads and their grandfathers and their family members have been making it for so long. So that's also a lot to do with it, not just the region. And maybe it has a lot. Hopefully in the future, people are going to understand the beauty about their region and like why their region can be fantastic in another sense. So I'm just looking forward to times where we start to really develop more, because I guess my point is the best drinks in the world, they're only coming from certain places right now because that's where they're being made. But when people start understanding where they're from and what can be made in their area, then that too will be a part of the same conversation.
Sure. Just like 20 plus years ago, nobody knew what New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc was, and now it's one of the most leading wine categories in the world.
Yeah. I enjoy that, and I'm very giddy when I think about like new places where people are making things, because that just makes me see progress in more in a more substantial way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Matt, it was interesting. You mentioned New Zealand, and my mother, who's our biggest cheerleader by far. She talks about a future at having a Judgment of Paris type moment where we're breaking the preconceived notions that consumers have of if it's not from Scotland, then I don't like it.
Ain't good. Yeah.
Well, how about on a blind basis, right? Taste it and let it stand on its character. And if you like it, then you like it. And by the way, it doesn't have to be from Scotland.
Right.
Similarly, I think not to get off that subject, but that age statements are something that we've all seen going away in the past decade or so. Right. But I think that's obviously there are the supply issues, but then on the demand side, I think as consumers get more educated about products, they kind of see that it's less about the number and more about the underlying quality. To mention a Scotch group that's taking it on, Bruichladdich, the Islay whiskeys, they're looking at being constrained by creating a product that the youngest whiskey in there is going to, be the age statement. And so, going through their warehouses and taking, 14-year, 12-year, 10-year, 8-year. But, if there's a really fabulous 6-year, right, that does all the right things, even if it's 1% of the batch, they can only say that that's a 6-year. And so, Bruichladdich is kind of taking that stand of we're going to make this good so that it tastes good, not for the number on the front of the label. And I think, just as we're trying to break preconceived notions that only certain locations can produce a product of quality, that also, certain age statements, we're trying to break that preconceived notion as well.
Older does not mean better. And as Julian Van Winkle says in the book that Wright Thompson wrote, it's about, does the whiskey make the trip? And there's a lot of evaporation and lowering of alcohol, or more increase of alcohol that the whiskey doesn't necessarily stand up to. So there's a sweet spot of an age, just like a human being, right? Like when you're at what's called your prime, when your mind and your body are in harmony and can tell each other what to do, but you have enough wisdom and knowledge of the situation that your body is working within that. And it's the same with whiskey.
I can't wait till I get to my prime. I'm looking forward to
you're
it.
Tom Brady's age, and look what he did at 40. So
he's 6 months older than me, so I do have some time. I've got some time to get those 10 Super Bowls.
I gotta say, it made me reinvigorate and see, well, damn it, if he's doing that at 43, I sure can well too. I mean, not to say that I'm Tom Brady, but like,
then
there's no
Matt went
excuse.
back to sipping on that Cabernet right after. He's like, what did I say? I forget.
I'll do it tomorrow.
So where does that take courage and conviction? So just to kind of reset as we get kind of closer to the end of the show today, where does that reset and where does that put Courage and Conviction now when it comes to a sales market, when it comes to coming to market? What is your plan of attack to make people understand what you're doing and hopefully get them to buy in?
Yeah, well, I mean, really the way I think about it is kind of two prongs is firstly, for a premium product, for a new brand and really a new category, right? In American single malt, very difficult to ask somebody to make that purchase decision without tasting it. Right. So liquid to lips is key. In 2020, it was, we launched in April of 2020, the Courage and Conviction product. Not ideal timing, but by the time, the bus had left the station, we hadn't even heard of coronavirus. But, tastings, traditional liquor store tastings was a huge part of our strategy. And of course, by April of last year, all of those dried up. And so what we did is pivoted to investing in equipment for filling 50 ml bottles, little airplane bottles, so that we could still have a pandemic friendly way to get liquid to lips, right? Without somebody having to commit to a full bottle. Doing a lot of virtual tastings there, a lot of free goods in markets that allow it, a lot of low retail in markets that allow it, and kind of putting our money where our mouth is that, if you taste it, you'll buy it. So we're willing to give a lot of it away for free. And then the other thing is, like in any consumer goods, whether it's electronics or clothing or whiskey, there are critics out there that will do write-ups on the whiskey, and they do their double-blind tastes and everything like that. So our first batch did well in Whiskey Advocate. We got a 91, which you think was the highest of a regularly available American single malt. And then just last week, we announced we were awarded 96 points by Wine Enthusiast, which was very, very humbling on the one side, but on the other side, very gratifying, seeing that all the things that we had been doing for all the years actually worked, right? Yeah. And great to have a third-party validation that we inside the company, we always think our baby's beautiful, but it's good to have somebody else think it too. And so getting liquid to lips in the market and letting the critics kind of speak to the quality and not necessarily the location or the age, right? But just the quality. I think that's going to be a great way to get us into the market. And despite the pandemic, we did get a great start in 2020.
I have one suggestion marketing-wise. The recently pardoned Lil Wayne, just, he's looking to do something now. He's got no crimes against him, no cases against him. And maybe if you can get him to Courage and Conviction, I imagine many things can rhyme and flow with those two words. So you could really do it. Maybe you could spit some words in.
But why Lil Wayne? Is he have any Virginia ties or malted whiskey ties?
Just because he just got pardoned by Trump. So I figured he's
not doing anything.
He needs to do something at this point.
Right. But Max, there's a big issue there because, if he's been pardoned, then, where's the conviction, right? For Courage and Conviction, right?
Oh, that's it. He's like, I
See
got
what
the
I did there.
I got the courage, no conviction.
There we go.
I got no conviction for this Courage and Conviction. One last thing. I'm holding the coin right here.
Oh, yeah.
This is a cool thing. And obviously this is a podcast, so no one can see what I'm holding. But on the bottle, there's a little coin that's magnetized to the actual bottle. It's affixed to it, and then this is just my opinion. You just take this off, and this is kind of like for your own records. Like, this is what I house this bottle, and this is proof. Is that what's the impetus behind this?
Yeah, so we wanted some way to have some sort of I think it's a really beautiful bottle, and we rather than just throwing it away, it'd be nice for somebody to have something that unlike in college, they don't have to put it on a shelf behind their bed, every empty liquor bottle they ever drink, but kind of a takeaway like the tin cup on tin cup whiskey or like the horses on top of the Blanton's bottle.
Yeah.
And we're changing it for different, we'll have single casks that'll have a cask number actually on that medallion. We'll have the individual cask expressions, sherry, cuvee, and bourbon that'll have different colors. And at the end of the day, this is what I told my son. I always really liked magnets. I think magnets are pretty cool. And if you like something like that, he was playing with his own magnets. And I said, if you really like something like this, then, you just make millions of them so that everybody else can have some cool magnets to play with.
Or were they magnetized?
They've been used.
that your son was playing with?
What he was playing with. Yeah, like those little.
Yeah, no, my son absolutely loves them, and I wish that he could build magnetiles with maybe next time I'll have him build a whiskey distillery with them and put the coin on there.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's our expansion strategy.
It's almost like
the tiles
for the bartenders.
Those things are awesome.
Those
challenge coins, like Fernet Branca does the little coin where you like show up at the bar, and if you show it, I think aren't you supposed to get a free shot or something
like that
if you show it? So maybe there's something.
It's kind of like what was that getting Smirnoff Ice type of thing? Is that the idea?
Well, if you're in the same category as Smirnoff Ice, then you're good.
Marketing wise.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll get there. We'll get there.
To put a bow on that, you mentioned The Judgment of Paris, and by the way, if anybody's looking for a great book on wine and a great moment, they should definitely read that book, The Judgment of Paris, by George Tabor, New York Times bestseller, about when in 1976 when the American wines in a blind tasting, like specifically the Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and then our Cabernet, showed and actually outclassed the French wines, which at the time was unheard of for California wine to do that.
There's a lousy movie about it, Bottle Shock.
Yeah, Bottle Shock. I mean, it's lousy. It's like more. Yeah, it's more movie.
It's a romanticized telling of it. So if you don't want to read a book and you just want to understand the story in kind of a semi-fake way, you can watch that movie. But that gave birth to winemaker Mikhail Grgich of Grgich Hills, because he was the winemaker at the time, and then brands like Freemark Abbey were in the Chardonnay and Cabernet category, which is cool. And then Stag's Leap won the whole thing.
Well, Chateau Montelena was like the big winner with the Chardonnay.
Yeah, that's what Grgich did.
And they weren't even going to send it. I forget that you can see in the movie. But
Freemark Abbey had a corked bottle for their Chardonnay.
They had to get another one or something.
No,
like
it just didn't make it into the show.
Yeah.
But cool lore, and I think that's something that maybe we need to do. I don't know. Have you blind tasted your whiskeys with some traditional old scotches, and have you fared well at all?
Yeah. I think when we look at the flagship product, that's something that's to me fairly unique in the three different types of casks versus I feel like with most single malts that are very popular, you focus on one or as a primary maturation and then focus on a secondary finish. I don't know that we're going to be able to go side by side with 25 year that has a lot of those kind of deeper and mustier and cereal notes. But what we're coming out with in the next few months here, I believe April of this year, we're going to be launching those individual cask expressions. I think consumers are going to be very pleased looking at really how our sherries perform under that extreme maturation environment I keep talking about, and same with the STRs. And seeing the individual notes, right, that pop out of the flagship. It's for some people, I think a complete sherry bomb is like candy whiskey, or who's ever heard of a cuvee cask? It's kind of a term of art, but I think if people can break any preconceived notions, or just get it done through a double-blind taste test, that people will be able to compare side by side with some of the best.
Yeah, but I see the thing as the whole single malt idea, and not only would you have to go up against Scotland, but like, for example, entry-level Balvenie, right, and then do like the 12-year Napogue Castle and the 10-year age statement Redbreast, or is that their like entry level? I feel like that would be a good kind of fair blind tasting if you tasted those all and build the idea of single malt and then categorize it by country would be a pretty cool tasting.
Let's set it up.
Yeah,
set it up, Max.
Well, hey, before we get out of here, we got to make sure that I bet you can probably access it out there in Virginia. And I'm talking about proof alcohol ice cream. Proof alcohol ice cream. Think differently about your dessert, because every pint has a 7%. It's loaded with 7% alcohol in it. And right now, they just released their new cherry flavor, their bourbon cherry, which you got to check out. It's pretty killer. It's their bourbon chocolate cherry. So that's what I meant to say. Make sure you check that out. It's in stores all around. You can go to Triangle Wine Company. You can go to Lowe's. I actually was at a Total Wine the other day. Dare I say I was shopped for the man? But how dare you? I had to be there. I was stuck at a Total Wine. I had to buy a beer. These are things I had to do. And there was a proof alcohol ice cream freezer there. So they're everywhere. Go get yourself some proof alcohol ice cream and go to proofalcoholicecream.com for more information.
Well, I'm happy that you were getting the proof alcohol ice cream, but I'm unhappy that you were not loyal to our great friends at the Triangle Wine Company.
I didn't want to be there. I was forced.
You were
there.
forced to be there.
Yeah.
Somebody dragged you in there.
They did.
Because I prefer you go to one of our beautiful local locations of Triangle Wine Company. Great people there, local business, have all of your wine, beer, vermouth needs. They do curbside delivery. They will do delivery to your house. All you have to do is go to trianglewineco.com. Don't forget to use the NCFB promo code. You'll get a discount. And they have locations all over the Triangle and in Southern Pines, and a new one coming to North Raleigh. So trianglewineco.com for all your wine and beer needs.
Lastly, Gareth, your whiskeys are available in North Carolina from what I see.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. I give you guys my own personal bump. I very much enjoy this. This is delicious.
This is delicious.
Yeah.
And it's a
Appreciate
really beautiful take on whiskey. And I do have one question. You don't malt your own barley, do you? Or is there plans to do that?
No. Malting's a big operation, so we
But
don't
the barley
malt our own barley. And
is local though, right?
No. Barley doesn't grow too well in Virginia. It normally does well in much cooler climates. So we go for traditional upper Midwest, where barley grows best.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Cool. Well, that's great news. And pick yourself up some courage and conviction, or go out there to Virginia and go for a distillery tour when you can and when it's safe, and you will drink extremely merrily.
Thanks for listening to the NC F&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes, and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.